Don't. You are listening to The Draft Show on the All Hornets podcast network. One podcast feed with multiple shows, making sure we cover the Charlotte Hornets from every angle. We are well and truly into draft season. June is going to be here before we know it. This episode, we're going to be doing a Stephon Castle and Donovan Clingan scouting report, spending some time up in Connecticut to cover both UConn prospects. I'm a little bit croaky voiced after a 48-hour stag do, as we call it in England, or a bachelor party, I think how you call it in the States. So my voice is a little croaky. My mind is a little hazy, but it's about to become very clear talking about these two prospects. Chase, how are we doing?
I'm doing very, very well. Fitting that we're doing a UConn episode this week because we had our first weekend of sun and warm weather up here in New England. So those UConn fellas, I'm sure they've left the campus long ago by now, but got a weekend of nice weather up in stores. I will be honest, when you originally mentioned that you were on a stag do this weekend, I had no idea what that meant. And I was going to just wait to ask you until we were on the podcast now. So, I mean, you got ahead of me and explained it right away. So props to you for taking the lead on that one, because that's what we would have been talking about right now.
48 hours. We did something called the Otley Run in Leeds, which is 16 pubs along a 2-mile corridor where everyone's in fancy dress. We were all dressed as Ken, and the stag or the bachelor was dressed as Barbie. His name is Ben. His name is Ben. So we all had on our t-shirts, "I'm just Ben," as a little bit of play on the words there for the Ken song. So it was a fun weekend. Leeds, who are in the championship playoffs, the football team, the soccer team, where if they won, they got promoted to the Premier League. And we watched it in like this crazy Leeds bar, and they lost. And it was a very sad moment. But like, I'm a United fan, and a lot of friends with me are United fans. And if you're a United fan in Leeds, you shouldn't say that, especially when they just lost the game to get promoted to the Premier League. And there were some of our party who decided to start Man United chants in the middle of the bar after Leeds lost, which we got out of the bar pretty quickly, because it's not even like funny in Leeds. It's like, no, like someone was going to wear a Man United top out as a joke on one of the nights out. And like, we literally didn't let them because we would have gotten fights, and we did not want that. Football hooliganism is a real thing over here. So we tried our best to stay out of trouble, and I think we just about managed it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can totally see that being realistic. I mean, you're basically asking someone to fight you if you wear a rival team's apparel, I feel like, in England, when it's especially during the season and in the situation that you were in. I can imagine that you guys ushered yourselves out of there very quickly, knowing the circumstances.
I was sitting next to one guy who started cheering, and I just like slowly went to the toilet. I was just like, I'm getting out of here. Like, if it all kicks off, I'm not standing in the way of these guys. Like, they're the idiots.
Yeah. I mean, like, we just like the same football team. This is I'm not fighting with you right now.
Okay, Stephon Castle. This has been a long time coming. We've already talked about him a little bit, I think, probably after the draft lottery. We talked about him on the mock draft podcast with Tyler Metcalf. We're going to go a little bit deeper here into some of the strengths, his weaknesses, his fit with the Charlotte Hornets. But we're going to first start with some interesting comments which have come out from Castle during the draft cycle. I think firstly at the draft combine, he came out and said, when asked, is there anything underrated you're wanting to show teams like that maybe you don't think they think you can do at the moment? He said, I think I can play point guard. And I think that's what I did at the high school level, and that's what I can do. And then that kind of snowballed into, in the latest ESPN mock draft, Jonathan Givony confirmed reports that he is looking to maybe only work out with teams looking for point guards and not those with a starting point guard. So that potentially rule out the Portland Trailblazers, potentially rule out the Charlotte Hornets, and maybe the Memphis Grizzlies. Chase, what do you make of these comments? Is this affecting your comfort with Castle as a prospect for Charlotte?
Definitely not. I personally just feel like this is a lot of draft stock positioning, trying to maybe limit the type, or posturing is probably a better word for it. Just trying to limit maybe the amount of teams that you work out for, the draft range that you're trying to go in. I feel like I don't know what exactly the motivation for it would be behind Stephon Castle's camp doing that, or whether that's even the case at all. But
he wants to play point guard. I guess
Right.
that's
I
the
mean,
motivation, right?
right, exactly. And whether or not that's something he cares about to the degree of like whether or not he gets drafted by the Hornets per se, and then it's like, oh, I don't really want to play here. That I would be pretty surprised about. But I'm sure he does have his preferences. I think the posturing is more of just a matter of trying to limit his draft range and workouts and just the kind of smokescreen stuff that agents and anybody that's in a player's camp can do around this type of year for their own benefit to influence it. Because obviously teams do it for their benefit all the time, bringing in guys, say, giving rumors to the media that say they like one guy when they really don't, and things like that. This is at least the one thing that players can control for themselves.
And they have slightly less control now than they did because they used to be able to withhold medicals. And because of Stephon Castle's draft range, he has to share medicals with the top 15 teams in this year's draft. So it's not like Charlotte would be in the dark in terms of medicals. So that was definitely one of the most powerful things that you could withhold from teams, especially like players who maybe had an injury history. Castle doesn't have too much of that, although he did have an injury this year. So that is good news. Chase, do you want to hear my theory? Right?
Ooh, hit me.
You know I like it when I go down these rabbit holes. And I've been doing some thinking. You know who has been hanging around the UConn's campus since basically February? James Bucknight. James Bucknight, who was waived from the Charlotte Hornets. James Bucknight, who did not have a good experience with the Charlotte Hornets. How much was that brought on himself? I think a lot of people tell you. How much is that Charlotte not supporting him in the ways that he needed? Either way, James Bucknight has had several instances where he will have interacted with Donovan Clingan, with Stephon Castle. And I'm telling you what, Stephon Castle is not hearing great things from James Bucknight about the Charlotte Hornets. I don't care what he says. I imagine there will be negative feelings there. And he probably will have been in the ear of these guys. Now, look, these people will make up their own mind. The agents, they'll have people around them. But it would not surprise me. And I'm not saying this is the root of him not wanting to work out, because it's not just the Charlotte Hornets, this rumor. But just generally, I think this is something we should keep in mind. It would not surprise me if they have a preconception in their minds about what Charlotte is and the Hornets from potentially some of the stories that James Bucknight heard, which we know was a turbulent period for the franchise, right? With a lot of off-court stuff happening. So that is my James Bucknight UConn theory.
I don't think you're too far off. James Bouknight has he's posted a bunch of stuff on social media of him working out at UConn. So, I mean, to say that they haven't interacted in some degree, maybe not about their like Stephon Castle's individual NBA future and how James Bouknight's experience went as a rookie with the Hornets, that may be a bit more specific than what they've talked about, but they've definitely developed some sort of relationship and interacted time and time again when they're at the UConn facility. And obviously they play pretty similar positions, so it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that they've probably worked out together or something like that too. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on there. But like you said, this isn't a specific thing to the Hornets, so maybe not the direct cause, but I mean, everybody takes information in this time of their life when they're a draft prospect, and every little thing can influence somebody to some degree. So definitely
I would be surprised at this point if Stephon Castle worked out for Charlotte, if this is true. Like, I don't understand why this rumor would get out there and then he suddenly starts working out with teams. That would just then look like they're scrambling and this party to camp don't really know what they're doing. So at this point, I'm not necessarily expecting a Castle workout. I will say, I actually like the idea of Castle more now after him wanting to play a point guard than he did when I thought he was just going to be coming in to play it too. And this is why. I think, firstly, he obviously has some form of confidence that he has some on-ball skills that he wasn't able to show at UConn. And I've watched some of the high school stuff. I think Tyler Metcalf on our podcast talked about. He dropped over 40 points on Ron Holland's team in high school. And that maybe there was an untapped upside we didn't see on the ball. I mean, he is a very powerful, talented downhill driver. And I think that's something we could see more of. So maybe there's a higher upside than just like a defensive difference maker who has some passing skills that he was previously billed to be. And then I think the other thing is, if Castle did come to Charlotte, let's say he did develop into this, great point guard, okay, two-way point guard, Drew Holiday type, right? Then you do have flexibility with, okay, like LaMelo Ball 2-3 years down the line when he's got a couple of years left in his contract. we've got a point guard who can come in and take over from LaMelo Ball if that goes south at some point. It gives you more flexibility and doesn't just like lock you into him strictly being the 2. And I just think Castle's self-aware enough that if he comes into Charlotte and he gets into training camp and preseason, and like he's just miles off LaMelo Ball's level, what is he going to say? I don't want to play shooting guard. Just put me on the bench, coach. No, he's going to want to play. Like he's going to want to get on the floor. So if he has to play the 2, if he has to play some back at 1, if LaMelo Ball gets injured and then he gets the opportunity to play 1, I just think it's a good thing. It gives you a lot more versatility. So I actually think it makes me like him more as a prospect rather than less, even if he doesn't want to work out here.
That's exactly where I fall on it too, because like, I mean, regardless of what his preference is, even if he doesn't get to play point guard, he's just going to keep playing the same position that he's played for his whole life. Like he's never really been a point guard per se before, unless it was at a lower level of high school. I wouldn't necessarily, he was more of a ball handler definitely when he was later on in high school and playing in AAU and whatnot, but he was definitely not like a true point guard, especially in the way that LaMelo Ball is. So all that really does is he doesn't develop into that point guard and you just play him as a 2 or a wing or whatever we're going to do anyway. And that's fine. And even if he does, that just affords you even more versatility. You can put him next to LaMelo Ball. You can play for LaMelo Ball. You could move on from either one of them and get a bunch of good trade assets back. Like that just gives you more options that way. And that's never something that you would, shy away from if given the opportunity. So like if he comes here, like why not just give him the opportunity to play backup point guard or something? We know how much that we've wanted a true legitimate backup point guard in this system for a long time. Like imagine if that panned out and we basically had 2 starting point guards in one. Like, I mean, we've been waiting a long time. I feel like we deserve something
the
like
Micic
that.
disrespect coming from your mouth.
Hey,
right
I mean,
now.
he could certainly do it, but if you you draft Stephon Castle number 6, and that pans out to the degree that some people think it can, or certainly he thinks it can, as him being a true lead guard, that is not a bad problem to have right there. And like you said, you'd have 3 point guards with Micic. So again, like just gives you more options that way. There's no downside to it. There's just it's only up from where he is now.
And statistically, he had a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio this year, 3 assists, 1.5 turners at UConn. Ball handling possessions in the pick and roll made up just under 19% of his total possessions. So not super high volume, but he ranked very good in kind of his points per possession basis in that. And in transition, he was also very good. That counted again for just under 19% of his possessions. Again, another very good rating on there. So absolutely, like his transition, pick and roll ball handler, some of the underlying statistics do suggest there's something promising there. Now, look, it was probably one of the best situations of any college basketball prospect, being surrounded by the guys he was surrounded with at UConn, basically 4 NBA caliber players, Tristan Newton, Spencer, Klingon, Caravan is going to get looks in the second round, if not this year, then next year. So it was a very good situation with lots of off-ball movement and offense, but he showed some ability at times here, but he had to play a role, which he did well.
And I actually think there's something to be said for him having all those intangible qualities, like willing to fall in line and play a role while being one of, I think, 2 or 3 guys at the top of the draft that's going to be 18 on draft night. Him, Ron Holland, and Nikola Topic are like the 3, I guess, like consensus top guys. So maybe, and Tijan Salon that are going to be 18 on draft night. Like he has developed all of those qualities, not necessarily like more than any of the other guys, but he's certainly gotten to demonstrate them more on a bigger stage with UConn last year, contributing as a role player while, only really bolstering his stock as a top draft pick for this coming year and being a part of a national championship. Like he's a physically and mentally ready NBA 2 guard in pretty much every sense of the word, like play style, physicality, frame. He's going to be 6'7" in shoes. Like it's really everything you'd want physically out of a 2 guard in terms of like his archetype that he's going to fill.
Okay, let's start on the offensive end, and I'm going to go straight in with the big question in everyone's mind: Stephon Castle's 3-point shooting. He's one of the prospects I deep dived in. So I charted all of his 3-point attempts this year, and he shot 28% on open catch and shoots, He shot 15% on guarded catch and shoots, made only 2 of 13 all season, and shot 22% on pull-up jump shots. Out of his roughly 80 to 90 attempts, about 10% of those, he had 9 kind of really bad misses that were air balls or like barely grazed the rim. So quite relatively high kind of bad miss portfolio, and some of those were very open. That's the big question. Like the more that I've heard, like I think he maybe finished second in the combine in the star shooting drill, I want to say, maybe behind Bronny James, or he was maybe ahead of Bronny James. He was up there anyway. I'm not saying we changed what we think about his 3-point stroke because of that, but I believe, and everything I've read, I did some research in high school, he is a better 3-point shooter than maybe he showed this year while not being a good one. Okay. He isn't what did he shoot this year from the college three? A 26.7% 3-point shooter, but he's probably somewhere like a 30% 3-point shooter. It's kind of what a lot of the high school people seem to think. It wasn't a glaring weakness in high school like it kind of appeared to be in college. And he came back from the injury. He had some issues. Like he shot really highly from the free throw line, I think in the second half of the season, which could be a positive indicator. Finished at 75% there. But I'm not sold on this. Like I even put out a tweet during the tournament where I was like, I see some MKG stuff. I know we've talked about that already, but I actually am more positive on the 3-point stroke, partly because of his confidence to take it a little bit more at the lower levels. And I think he played a role this year. I don't think he'll be a non-shooter. Let's put it that way.
That's probably where I fall as well. I don't necessarily think he'll ever, especially quickly, like become somebody that defenses, respect, I guess, and he have any sort of gravity on that end. I think he'll get treated a lot like he did in that Alabama game. And this is an example of like the positive end on, being what billed as a non-shooter that does have at least like confidence to heat up and the willingness to shoot an open shot. Like he took care of them in that game. He basically beat them single-handedly, scored like 25 points or something, made a couple of wide open threes and just got himself going. And that was it. Like, I think he'll be good enough to be somebody who does things like that in the NBA while not having really any gravity as like a pull-up scorer from three, especially, even though he does have some flashes of that in high school, especially that 40-point game against Ron Holland's team that you mentioned earlier. But I also don't necessarily think he has to be a good shooter to be a good player. He's a very good slasher. If he develops really any of that playmaking, then he's going to have that as an ancillary skill. And if he can defend 1 through 3, shoot 32, 33% from beyond the arc, which isn't inconceivable even for somebody that's had the very limited flashes and indicators of being a floor spacer that he has, there's just a way to make an impact with that skill set in the league and that physical frame, like even without being like a lights out knockdown shooter. He probably needs to play in a pretty specific situation for that to work out, like especially to the point where you'd want to draft him in the top 5 or whatever. But he's certainly somebody that I don't think is going to just like flame out of the league if he doesn't shoot. It's just going to be like a swing skill that brings him from like backup level to like full-time starter and somebody that can be like a top rotation player on a good team.
I mean, look at the playoffs right now. These guys who have like bulk and strength and can defend, guys who can slow down Anthony Edwards, Luka Doncic. Like this is who you kind of have to try and throw at these guys. And like Jaden McDaniels, who's on Luka, can't guard the guy. He's not got the strength. And Castle, for me, that's his superpower, is his power and strength at his size. I just think it's one of the most underrated things. And I think strength is probably one of the most underrated aspects when it comes to the draft, because everyone always talks about, well, they'll put on weight down the line. But those who are already like powerful and moving guys at the age of 18, that just jumps out to me. We've heard about the Isaac Okoro comp, who played for Cleveland. He was probably billed as a similar type prospect as Castle, ended up getting taken the 5th pick in 2020. Isaac Okoro in college shot very similar, 28% from 3, and he had a 67% free throw percentage. Look now onto this past season. Isaac Okoro shot 39% from 3 on low volume, still down like 68% from the free throw line. But for his career in the NBA, is a 35% 3-point shooter and a 73% free throw shooter. I think Castle can, like, if he got to that level, I actually think his ceiling would be higher than Okoro's. But he has the work ethic. He has the mindset. He's great intel off the court. Apparently, he's someone who just absolutely loves to work. I'm pretty confident that he is going to be able to make jumps forward. And there are examples of players of a similar skill set, like Okoro, who's managed to do just that.
And if you think about it one way too, especially when it comes to the Hornets, he's going to be surrounded by players that are volume efficient shooters pretty much all the time. So if you want to put him in a situation where he actually could be maximized, even if that shooting doesn't pan out fully, Charlotte would probably be one of them. And then obviously what do they need on the defensive end? Someone who fills the exact type of role defensively as Stephon Castle. So that would be something that that would be a situation where I think you could really get something out of him right away. Like you said, using that like strength and like ability to just move guys out of your way at such a young age, and then developing the skill stuff and off-ball shooting and all that other things that can tend to come with time for most guys that don't have it at a young age.
In terms of other kind of ways on offense that he scores, because we've talked about the three-point shooting, we've talked about some of the ball handling. I think he's a smart off-ball cutter. He has some really interesting flashes of super soft floaters in the lane, which again, I think is a good show of touch, like where there is a big waiting there for him, and rather than kind of like barreling into the shot blocker, he's able just to kind of pull up and put up that soft little floater. He has a really good pump fake. He gets defenders to bite. He's like explosive and slithery in the lane, like a stop-start, kind of gets people to jump, manages to get up and catch his own misses a lot of times. So like all these like little ways that you can see him grabbing an offensive rebound putback every game, drawing a foul into the basket when he's able to pump fake and pivot. I think he does enough other things on offense that it's not just like, who's who I'm thinking, like a Tony Snell, where he just literally stands around and shoots the ball. I know you know Tony Snell. So I think there's other ways on offense that he helps in complementary ways, just enough that I think I can see a higher upside way for him to score as an off-ball guy.
I also feel like, I don't know if you think this as well, but I feel like his slashing is very close to being an NBA ready skill. Like right now. I agree. And that's something he could rely on as like an on-ball player and be able to actually create his own shot. Like he has very great use of his like stride length on gathers when he's driving. And that's what allows him to get to that floater so easily. His deceleration and like just ability to stop quickly is pretty impressive for somebody that's his size and strength. And he's like, it's kind of weird because I don't think he has very much like first step explosiveness or like burst or anything like that, which is why he's like not necessarily like regarded as this like explosive scorer. But I feel like after that, like he just has so much like strength, pace with poise, which we've talked about a lot with Brandon Miller. Like he operates at a similar pace in the mid range to Brandon Miller without the ability to like pull up and shoot a jumper. But once you get into that like floater range and where he can just take like drop his shoulder, bump you a little bit, take 2 long, like hard steps to the rim and finish, like that I think is his bread and butter right now as an offensive player. And there are ways I think you can build out of that much easier than if you don't have that strength and finishing ability. And he does show like touch on those shots as well, which, you know, he doesn't show very much touch anywhere else right now, even from the free throw line. But like that could be something that you can maybe try and channel and turn that into something like a pull-up jumper, just instead of a floater, just take 5 steps back and he can maybe hit a little bit of a mid-range shot. Like even if he never shoots the 3, he adds things like that. He becomes a little bit better of a playmaker, obviously continues to develop his finishing and get even better at it than he already is. Like that, again, like that's somebody that's effective and able to impact a game at a pretty high level without being like a great shooter and having like some sort of like elite first step burst or something like that. Like he just seems like a guy that's going to be able to figure it out, because that's exactly what he's done so far. Like regardless of what role he's in, he's been a good player. And now last year he was a part of a winning team for the first time and did whatever he needed to do to help that team win a championship. So I feel like these are all good signs on top of the on-court production that we saw.
I am sitting here nodding in complete agreement with literally everything you said there. Like I had the exact same. He is like, he doesn't have a great first step, but he just finds a way to get into the lane. he kind of plays at a weird pace. Again, what you talked about, where he's not go, go, go. It's like a lot of 18-year-old freshmen is like, I've got the ball, drive. Like he plays very under control, and at times it almost looks like slow. Like I wish you'd almost do things a little bit quicker, but he equally kind of gets to where he needs to get to, and has that first step where he's not like explosive, but I think, like you said, stride length. Like he's able just to get around guys, even though it looks smooth. So I agree with everything you said. I think 75% for the year from the free throw line for an 18-year-old freshman, playing in some of the biggest games any freshman would play in. I mean, in that Alabama game that was close, he went 5 of 6 from the free throw line. Like he hit free throws in key times in key areas. Let's move to the defense, because this is, I mean, we've not even got onto the stuff that we think is really exciting with Stephon Castle. Again, just a very impressive both on-ball stopper. You saw it in moments where he was put on Terrence Shannon Jr., shut him down. He was put on, it was Brandon Smith, the Purdue guard. They shut him down, put him on Mark Sears at times in the Alabama game, who's another late-round pick. Just has a long list of guys that he clamped up. And you may look at the box scores and be like, oh, Mark Sears still scored 20 points. Yeah, if you watch the game, those are all the possessions where Castle basically got off him, that he was like, oh, I can breathe, let me score. He is a very interesting defender, not just an on-ball guy either, like has a lot of like smart kind of like off-ball, does good job like denying the ball, is a good help defender, slithers through screens really well, like really good at contesting. Baylor Scheinman was another guy who kind of locked up over the year as it went. And he just has a way of like staying connected at all times at a guy's hip, which you see the best defenders do. A little subtle holds and grabs off the ball just to always stay in contact, blows up dribble handoffs, deflections. I think a stat I caught during one of the broadcasts is opponents are shooting 20% from the field when he's guarding them, which again just goes to show some of his like one-on-one defensive impact. Is a messy stat, that always, but I think it's still an interesting one. So defensively, he is a versatile player who I think will be able to guard 1 to 3. And because of that super strength, I think he could even maybe guard some 4s as well.
I completely agree. I feel like right away, he's definitely big and physical enough to switch all the way across the perimeter. It's be able to defend the point of attack. He can get steals on ball on just absolutely swarming smaller guards because he's much bigger than them. And while it's so strange because he's a pretty athletic dude, all things considered, just other than the ways that like really show up on film, I guess, or in like a highlight reel, especially. He doesn't blow by guys. He doesn't dunk on people super often, but he can really move his feet in space. He covers so much ground, not necessarily even on the ball either, but he can go from, being in help on the corner to being in deny on the wing in like 2 steps. And those are very quick steps that cover a lot of ground. And he's right in front of you at the end, but perfectly firm and positioned to defend. He right now, as a pick and roll ball handler, defending the pick and roll, 92 possessions. That was the highest volume defensive play type that he has on Synergy. He allowed 0.5 points per possession in those play types. That is outrageous. Like it takes teams so long to put up a reasonable number of points when Stephon Castle is defending your pick and roll ball handler. That is in the 94th percentile, by the way, among all players in the Synergy database for NCAA D1, I believe. That is just a tremendous mark for somebody that's that young. He obviously shows it on ball. He's going to be able to defend. He's not a super like productive playmaker, I think, but he's going to be able to defend multiple positions, just force passes. Like he's somebody that you're just not going to get very far on him. He may not steal it from you or block your shot or anything, but that's only because you're not going to get very many dribbles before it's very apparent that you're not going anywhere.
You're not going to get.
He's got to pick it up and pass, right? Like he's just going to be somebody that forces an incredible amount of pickups on that end, and just causes guys to completely rethink their approach and their strategy. Like he is a real like tenacious like dog defender on that end, like in every facet of the word. And again, like at his age, his size, his frame, the physicality that he plays with, that is just extremely, extremely appealing, regardless of whatever shortcomings that he may have on either end of the floor. It's hard to look past those types of things from a player that played on that stage too. He really just checks all the boxes on defense for me.
The one thing I will say on defense, I think at the minute he does overhelp at times. I think if you look at his spot up defense on Synergy, I think he allowed 46% or so from the field on spot up attempts. And I think that is because like he would sag off and he would help and he would reach in and try and pick up deflections. But for me, that's just like a experience schematic thing. I mean, a lot of games that UConn were playing, they were up by so many points. It was like, it doesn't really matter too much if I help off and try and generate a steal here and there. But I mean, it doesn't sound like we've talked about many negative things. I want to try and draw us to a close here-ish if we can. I guess we talked about the shooting. What are some of the other weaknesses? Because if like that is that it? Or do you think there are other weaknesses maybe here that we need to talk about a little bit?
I don't know if his ball handling is a weakness, but I definitely can't ever see him being a like true shot creator. Like I think he'll be able to take pull-up jumpers when he's given space, and if he's one-on-one and can just rise over somebody, or if there's some sort of like defensive mistake, he can take advantage of that. I definitely don't envision him being like an isolation scorer in any way. And obviously, if the three-point shooting never comes around to like a real degree, like we were talking earlier, he can make an impact being like a 32, 33% shooter. He could be somebody that's like a genuine, like not all-star maybe, but like borderline, or is at least like a very, very productive starter, somebody that gets paid a lot and spends a lot of time in the league. If he is like a good shooter around 36, 37%, and if you're drafting somebody in the top 5, like that's like what you want. You're not necessarily looking for like a Josh Hart level like role player. Like you want somebody that's going to be able to make an impact without shooting, or by shooting at a much higher degree than that when you're drafting in that range. So that would be maybe the negatives for him are more so due to the context of the class. Like if you picked him at 12 in a normal year, you'd be, I feel like, ecstatic about it. But picking him at 4, 5, or 6, and if the offense doesn't come around, he doesn't develop as a playmaker, I feel like he's not going to have very much of an offensive game outside of slashing, which does obviously have its positives. But again, like it just limits your ceiling that way. And you don't really want a player with a limited ceiling in the top 6. But like, there's no way to know those things until it happens, because he's such like a swing skill guy that needs projection to really like encapsulate the type of player he could be.
Yeah, I do think he is someone that like fits into a better team a lot better than he does. Like if he went to Washington, all right, and I think that could be really rough. There could be a lot of ugly moments with ugly full shots, turnovers, loose handle. But if he's able to go somewhere, and this is why I think Charlotte's one of such the good landing spots, because he would be able to fit next to Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball, which would help mitigate a lot of his weaknesses. And I do think like the situation at UConn this year, I give him a lot of credit for buying in, like say, to that role, probably sacrificing shots and roll and possessions compared to what other top high school recruits would normally do. I also do think he was able to hide some of those warts. Like we know what they are, but they could have been on show a lot more if he went somewhere and was like given the ball and was the guy, and it could have looked a lot uglier a lot more often. I just don't think we have like a great idea of like what a high usage Stephon Castle would look like. And let's not remember, like, Alabama are a very good basketball program, and they went into that game in the Final Four and they were like, we think our best thing is just to let Stephon Castle beat us. Now he did. Okay. He did. But that goes to show like that other coaches out there had those same questions about just like his offensive scoring. Like, and yes, he had 20-something points. They were wide open.
Purposefully. Like the defender would turn around and go to get the rebound when they noticed he got the ball. Like it was
no one's going to be like quite left. Even like if you play off people, you don't be left that open like you are in the NBA. And the 3-point line is further out. So I do think maybe there are some of those like foibles, like say something like the ball creation, the assist to turnover ratio. I think it might be look a little bit better in the statistics now because of that situation that he was able to play in, which just was so tailored to him so well. So I think there could be more warts in his game that we're able to see this year.
Yeah, the Alabama game is a positive because of the way it happened, but if you play that 10 times, there's probably
Yeah.
only 2 or 3 of those that actually play out, and to his credit, again, he got the 2 or 3 in that one instance where he ended up beating them, but there's 82 games in the NBA, so I think you're right. If he ended up with a team like Washington that just gave him the ball and let him go, there would probably be a lot more lowlights than highlights, I think.
His fit with the Hornets, I mean, let's keep this really brief because I think we have already hit this on previous podcasts. And if you're listening to this now, you'll have read 100 mock drafts for Stephon Castle going 6 to Charlotte Hornets. I mean, do you think this is, let's put it this way, actually, maybe we look at it this way. Is this the best fit of any prospects in the draft range with the Charlotte Hornets, in your opinion?
Yeah, probably not by a very large margin, I don't think, but I would say that I would prefer somebody that has more of a wing play style and is more of like an off-ball like shooter type, but again, like the defense that he's going to provide, the downhill scoring, the intangibles that he's going to bring to the locker room for a young player, like those types of things qualify him much in a much greater degree than they normally would, given the Charlotte Hornets as a franchise. And he isn't necessarily a wing, but obviously has size. He's going to be around 6'7" in shoes, which I mentioned earlier. He's strong. That allows him or Brandon Miller kind of to defend the opposing team's 2 or 3. You can kind of do that matchup based, and then LaMelo as the lead ball handler. So I think he does fit pretty well, much better than anybody that's like not a pure wing or like a center, basically, on this roster. So he is my number one player if I were making like a Hornets specific big board, apart from like Sar and Risa Shea, Topic, the guys that are regarded as top prospects. But he would definitely be up there for me. So what about you, James? Is he your number one realistic target for the Hornets as well?
He is. Yeah, I think his fit's seamless. I'm at 5 on my board right now. I'm even thinking about moving him up. Like the medicals for Topic, for Klingin, I think are 2 things like where they could be tiebreakers, that those medicals don't come back great. Then Stephon Castle could be moving on up there towards the top 3, top 4. So again, like just doing this, we struggle to find many negatives outside of the shot, and I think we both feel that he will be like a 32% shooter, even on low volume, and there just wasn't many negatives that we pointed out. I guess apart from like the overall scoring package, I don't think that'll be a huge issue on the Charlotte Hornets with the way they project forward. So that will do it for Stephon Castle for the scouting report. We know you'll have heard a lot about Stephon Castle already. Hopefully, we were able to bring and shed a light on a few of the more detailed areas of his game that you maybe hadn't heard of, and we hope you enjoyed it.